Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am Farah Kimji, your 2020 Toronto Crew President, and we are so happy to have all of you join us for today's webinar. Before we jump into the content today, I would like to take a moment to thank our 2020 sponsors. We'll just flip through right now. The sponsorship that we get really allows Toronto Crew to deliver relevant and important programming for our members, even through challenging times. And so we are very appreciative of your support for Toronto Crew. Thank you to our sponsors. I'll now like to just highlight some of the upcoming events that we have. These can be found on our website as well, where you can register. And we also broadcast them in the newsletter that goes out to our members. So be sure to take a look. We have a pretty packed calendar for June, and we would be excited to have you guys join us for as many events as you can. Now, I would like to just mention a few housekeeping rules that this session is being recorded. You guys are all on mute and without camera. There's a chat function that you can just jump in and say hi to each other. And then there's a separate Q&A function where you can submit questions to the panelists. So I encourage you to do that. And before we get started, I would like to share, I know we have a lot of members as well as non-members joining us today. So I'd like to share that the mission of Toronto Crew is that we are dedicated to helping women excel, influence, and lead throughout their real estate careers. And during this time, our board has thought of what that means given the current landscape. And we feel that offering programs that support the professional development of our members, as many of you work from home today, is very important. And so we are very excited to share with you today's webinar, which the topic is providing certainty around the uncertainty. And so without further ado, we have an excellent lineup, and I'm going to pass it off to Lori Irwin to further introduce the topic and our panelists. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Farah. Welcome all crew and non-crew members. We're happy you took the time out of your busy day to join us. We're here to present through different lenses of our panel expertise to inform and make educated decisions on how to move forward during these times. Our panel includes Susan Chang. She is practice leader at HOK. She is the taskmaster of our group, and she has a great quality to make people laugh. Joel Brown, relationship manager at M-Form Construction Group. New father, definitely the social butterfly of the group. Ben Finley, business development manager at Office SCI. We go back over 10 years. I met him in Ottawa when we worked together on a project for IBM. He's an art aficionado with a strong passion to do the right thing. We have Kyle Brown, manager, architecture and design strategy at OfficeSource SCI. He's a sweetheart, a strong, loyal, silent type. Very much a true gentleman. And lastly, we have Russell Smith, solutions director at DTS. He's a big creative thinker, a little quirky tech guy that everyone loves. He's always striving to find perfection in everything he does.
And I do have to introduce Lori. We can't go on without having a proper introduction of Lori, also a practice leader at HOK and my partner in crime. The two of us lead this design studio at HOK. She's an all-round glamour girl, as you can see, and HOK's very own social and design maven.
Thanks, Susan. So one size does not fit all. Every organization is different with varied needs, including timelines, business continuity plans, culture, individuals within the workplace, thus requiring your own approach and preparation to return to the workplace. Next. For the agenda, we'll be reviewing the immediate action items to prepare for the office re-entry, as well as mid to long-term design, construction, furniture, and technology considerations. We encourage all to use the Q&A section in the Zoom call. We anticipate there'll be approximately 20 minutes of opportunity to ask our experts questions at the end of this presentation. And I'm going to turn it over to Susan.
Thanks, Lori. So we are going to talk about the immediate, as Lori mentioned in the agenda. Before I really dive into it, I do want to mention that at HOK, since we cover certainly all of Canada and the States, as well as other parts of the world, we have the good fortune of working with a large contingent of clients right across Canada and the US. And so therefore we've been very fortunate to be privy to a lot of information and discussion. And one of the salient points that we are gathering from all of that is that there is not one organization thus far that is rushing to bring their workforces back to the office prematurely, which is fantastic. People are not engaging in knee-jerk reactions. Companies are taking their time to analyze and strategize their returns, which is really great. Because right now the time is to begin planning for your resilient workplace. So as a very first step, and we are seeing this with many of our clients, they do this naturally, which is really great. It's to engage in conversation with the whole team. It really requires an integrated team approach in determining that readiness to return, which is really the first step. This requires a multidisciplinary approach. So integrating a team, making sure that there's leadership, executive sponsorship. This won't go anywhere without having that executive sponsor. There needs to be voices from workplace, operations, facilities, technology, HR, finance. Most importantly, the employees, understanding and hearing from your employees, your staff, what they're thinking, and of course, real estate. So integrating the voice and having a dialogue with your landlord and understanding what is happening in terms of building level. When we talk to the workforce, we want to understand how they're faring in their individual work from home situations. It's now been essentially 3 months that everybody and many people are working from home. So understanding what their perception is with respect to readiness to return and whether they have the will, the need, and even can return. So that's one step. And discussing with business unit leaders which members of their teams must return. So none of this can happen in a silo. So as an organization, HOK has put together a whole slew of questions that we have been gathering as we've been talking to our various clients right across North America. I'm not going to go into huge detail on each of these questions because we only have a short time together today. Happy to answer anything afterwards, but I will point out some of the key ones, certainly as you are at the very beginning stages or just, really starting to think about and strategize your return to the office. You need to really think about the role that employee mobility will play in your organization going forward. What do you know about how well people are working right now? What is the purpose of coming to the office? How will that change going forward? And what factors are driving your perspective and decision making? If you're asking people to take potentially 3 modes of transportation and expose themselves to risk and their health and safety, to have them come into the office and then exist in a bubble on their own at the office and then turn around and expose themselves again to get home, is that the right reason to have somebody come into the office? So at the very least, these are questions that really, really, really need to be thought about. And as I'd mentioned earlier about landlords and understanding what's happening at the building level, there are changes as to how people will get into buildings. How will they even get into the lobby? How is that being dealt with? How will they get into an elevator and up the elevator and to the floor that they're working on? Without understanding that, there's just no point in coming back. And has the building management or the landlord even conveyed regarding cleaning protocols, how visitors will be dealt with, and deliveries and HVAC? There's so many things to consider and discuss. HOK developed over the past 3 months. As I've mentioned, we've been working with a lot of different clients, and we've been hard at work putting together kind of a 4-pronged approach to that re-entry into the office. We know that the number one concern from the general population is worrying about proximity to others when returning to the workplace. So the very first step is what we call supply and demand modeling. With respect to supply, it's evaluating your floor plans, your existing floor plans, and understanding the space planning so that you can understand occupancy capacities and start modeling against business and employee wants or needs so that you can prioritize that return to the office. Once you understand that number in terms of supply or what's available, then you can start working through demand, which is, as I've mentioned before, surveying your workforce, determining who is willing to come back and who really can come back. And of course, that includes discussing with business unit leaders to understand who must come back and who's really critical to the organization. Once you know that number for supply and you know the number for demand, then you're able to understand if there's a gap. Now, I can tell you this, after working with many organizations, some of them on a national basis, which have different jurisdictions, obviously, and have different rules about coming back. What we're seeing is that there is no gap in the sense that there are more people wanting to come back than there is supply. People, as I was mentioning earlier, are taking a very measured approach to coming back and really looking at it in a phased way. And so there's really not a huge rush to come back. And that very first phase that we're seeing on average seems to be in the 10 to 15% of workforce wanting to come back in that first wave. So the next stage in planning a reentry is, after you've done the supply and demand modeling, really starting to think about any potential planning and design modifications. And again, this is going to vary depending on the layout, depending on all of the things that I've talked about, and really depending too on each company's business continuity planning, whether they're still in a triage situation, and funds are tight. Nobody's rushing to throw a whole bunch of money at reconfiguring. I mean, right now, what we are saying to our clients and the discussions we're having are to keep calm and to really take a measured approach, as I said. The next stage is really to start thinking about policy, practice, technology, and operations recommendations, and support that development of any new and evolved workplace and facility management practices. Because no matter what, if you are making any kind of modification to the physical aspect, or even how you're expecting people to behave in your space, there will naturally be an evolution with respect to practices and operations. So that is something that you have to expect will be necessary. And last but not least, it's flexibility and scalability. The solutions need to be developed that are scalable. If we're talking about resilient workplaces, then anything that is developed or decided must be flexible so that it can respond to any potential impacts brought on by future health events. We no longer want to have that kind of panic situation that many of us experienced when COVID first hit, where it seems, based on everyone that I've talked to and that, we've dealt with at HOK, was roughly a 2-week period of what is going on. And so the idea of a resilient workplace is one that can flex and contract in response to anything that might be happening in the environment. That's the goal. So on this slide, I'm going to talk about planning, reviewing plans, analyzing them. This is what you see on the slide is a first level analysis. It's actually a downtown client of ours. And we've taken this plan and really started to take a lens of that first preliminary look at the number of work points so that we can advise our client on what kind of supply they have before they start determining their demand. If you recall, I had mentioned supply is that first step, supply and demand, where we can understand what that number is that a client can expect to bring back to the office. And so you can see in this plan, there's a whole bunch of circles on here. The little colored dots really represent seats or work points, as well as seats in meeting rooms, and the larger circles around them indicate that physical distance of 2 meters. We've also shown hotspots, which are the larger kind of colored in circles that start to indicate areas which could pose potential issues to the health and safety of people. So this is all to really open up that dialogue with the client. The other potential reason here that we do this is so that the dialogue can also happen to consider a distributed work program that may enable staff to work remotely, perhaps considering staggered start times to ease commuting congestion, possibly expanding spacing between seats at work points, especially when you see those hot spots, and maybe transitioning to unassigned seating. That's potential for some organizations that have, are currently fixed. It's allowing employees to establish their own boundaries and pick a seat that enables them for distancing, creating clean desk policies so that surfaces can be cleaned daily, and potentially incorporating plants to aid with the air quality. Considering adding dividers such as mobile marker boards or screens, which can open up the space to increase shielding. And oops, I am going very quickly here. Coming back. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is thinking about planning public spaces and reducing occupancy of traditionally high gathering spaces such as cafes, which is in the image that I'm showing here. We need to start thinking about reducing high touch areas and perhaps leveraging hands-free and sensor controls. This may not be something that is done on day one, but could be a potential later, for day 4 or day 5. Different clients are discussing eliminating self-serve food and opting for prepackaged food, eliminating washable and multiple use utensils, dishware, and cups. One of our clients is thinking about assigning individual cups and utensils to each employee so that they have that and it's their own, nothing is shared. And another thing that I'll bring up that might not be for day 1 again, but for later on, I think that we will start to see an increase in separate hand hygiene stations. I think these will be necessary and they can't be shared or even close to kitchen sinks. So we will start to see the adoption of healthcare design approaches in workplaces. The other thing too that we really need to think about is operational changes. So I had mentioned earlier in looking at that plan analysis, we will probably have rooms such as meeting rooms that might have had, say, 10 people or the ability to accommodate 10 people reduced to, say, 3 people. And it may not be immediately obvious upon approaching that room that it's only 3 people. So signage noting capacity will be necessary. Thinking about the supply and proper deployment of PPE, this is a hot topic amongst our clients. It is amazing how many people ask me about what is being mandated with respect to face masks. I get asked that question at least once a day by different clients. So it is being discussed. People are talking about it, they're thinking about it, and they're coming up with what works for their operation with respect to instructions on PPE, whether it's supplying cloth-made ones to each employee that can be washed in between, or it's disposable ones, and kind of the rules around, they're worn when it might be impossible to physically distance yourself, like in a meeting room or a cafe, for instance. So how do we prepare for that re-entry into the space? So I'm going to talk about people because the success of any operational and or reconfigurational change in any workplace is dependent on your people. Whether the change has been well communicated and they understand what the change is and adopt the change themselves. Any new design or revision to the operations will only be as successful as the change management plan. And that success will be measured by your people's continued behavior within the space. People really need to learn to desire the change or they just won't do it. They need to embrace it, adopt it, and use it. And what I've been talking about thus far is to take the existing workplace, which is a place that people have been used to going to and working a certain way every single day, 5 days a week. And now we will be asking them to go back, and it's a vastly changed environment. Elements of it may look the same, but it will not be the same. And how they're expected to use it will be very different than what they were used to. There are 3 main phases in the organizational change trajectory. At HOK, we work very closely with our clients hand in hand to assist them in defining and preparing their staff for any coming changes. And this is just on a typical interior design project. So with respect to any kind of major change, which is a major operational change, this is even more salient to do. We would assist by determining change champions within the organization, and there need to be people within the organization that will champion that change. That will ensure the success. These change champions will work to develop and implement the change plans, and even post-occupancy will need to ensure the reinforcement of the change continues. And these are the 5 fundamental changes or elements of change management that will be essential to ensuring that the readiness to return plan is successful. I've mentioned a lot of different things which are very different in terms of behavior, wearing a face mask, reading signs before entering rooms, for example, washing your hands when you get to the office. These are all things that need to be codified as etiquette and protocols, new protocols within that back to work environment, or else people just won't know. And it can't be applied or communicated on the very first day. This needs to be integrated into that whole readiness to return plan so that communications can be given well in advance, and as well formally addressing any resistance to change, because 100% there will be resistance to change. We are human beings and humans do not like to change. That is an absolute for sure thing. So there will be resistance, and it's really understanding how to deal with that. Coaching to staff is also extremely necessary, especially for managers that not only are experiencing the change themselves and maybe having a hard time with it, but they're also expected to manage other people and they have to coach them on the change. So it's extremely important to coach those managers so that they're confident in embracing the change and modeling that change for their people, and reinforcing these new behaviors to staff so they don't resort back to the old behaviors. This all has to be clearly communicated. And now to talk a bit about the medium to long term. So the new phase 2, this can be a combination of what these images are saying on this slide. It can be a combination of your staff working from home, so remote work. There could be staggered shifts. So basically what happens after that initial 10 to 15% come back to work, as I had mentioned earlier, that's just the very first wave. You may have phase 2 and phase 3 where you start to introduce a larger percentage of your workforce. So what starts to happen then when we think back to the supply and demand modeling, and that gap starts to close and even go in the other direction where you may not have enough supply, that's when you might start thinking about different operational changes like staggered shifts, for example. There could be increased sanitizing and cleaning protocols. I shouldn't say could be, there will be. There need to be increased sanitizing. There may be some installation of increased shielding elements and identification of boundaries throughout the space. I will just say one word of caution about increased shielding elements, because I hear so much, and you can just open LinkedIn and you can see it all over the place. You know, you can get your plexi and install it everywhere. But one thing I will say about it, which people may not realize, is that you start putting up plexiglass all over the place and you're introducing more surfaces that need to be sanitized and disinfected. So there's always kind of that contrast and catch between something that you do. There's always something else on the back end that has to be considered. And in the medium to long term too, there may include a lot more technology in the built environment, such as occupancy sensors and other monitoring devices. Russell, one of our partners here on the webinar, he will be talking more about this later. And it's pretty exciting too. Just wait until you see what he has to show us. I can't even hope to touch it with anything that I'm saying. And so really we need to reimagine what that future can be. How can we create spaces that will help people to feel safe when they return to work? We really need to also look at furniture, furnishings and equipment, material specifications. I'd mentioned earlier about healthcare design approaches. I think that that is really going to come into play now. I can tell you this much, I've been in healthcare design for 25 years. And as well, I do workplace. And I never thought in my wildest dreams as a designer that I would ever see the convergence of healthcare into workplace. So there you go. Now I've seen it all. Ben and Kyle, also on this call from Office Source, will be talking about this in much more detail. And I think this goes without saying, but how do we enable that physical distancing without it equaling social isolation? I think that's really important. I think that we can still design spaces that allow us to collaborate and be together while also keeping us apart. It's important to have a variety of spaces, maybe more so now that people are going to be working from home in some way, shape, or form, because we know from all the surveys that we've initiated that a high percentage of people want to work from home more, not all the time, but potentially 2 or 3 days a week and only come in for a couple of days. When they come in, they need to be able to see people when they come in. I mean, that will likely be the draw for them to come in. So how can we provide a variety of spaces that will enable occupants to choose what works for them while being able to remain safe? And that can be as simple as the kind of furniture that you choose and its placement. Something as simple as that can guide and correct the positioning that is required, that can encourage those behaviors desired, such as physical distancing. And that's it for me. I'm going to pass it back to Lori.
Thanks, Susan. That was very insightful. And I know I wrote down a few questions that we'll talk about later. Next up is Joel from MForm. MForm is a company that includes pre-construction, construction management, general contracting, and client care. MForm and HOK work together on Rogers and Scotiabank ecosystems, just to name a few.
Great, thanks, Lori. Let me start with this statement. Currently, 55% of construction materials used in Canada come from Wuhan, China. Think about that. You could imagine the panic construction schedules when Wuhan, China officially announced its closure in late January. Steel, copper, glass, plastics, mechanical equipment, and lighting were the first to be impacted. We're now realizing how closely we are tied to China for supplies. For a while, we were saying it's not only that materials will be unavailable, it's that they'll become unaffordable. Many projects will take longer, maybe 10 to 30% longer. Now, these impacts include, among others, schedule delays, workforce disruptions, equipment and supply chain disruptions, reduced productivity due to health and safety measures such as social distancing, stretching forward, and of course, we're seeing some permit delays. The reason these disruptions are so important to understand the real estate community, that if you're currently in the middle of a project or about to start one, these disruptions need to be addressed by either extending your current lease and pushing out your go live dates, or expedite your upcoming projects by hiring consultants earlier to hit these new milestones. Got off a call this morning and I need to make it clear that if schedules are pushed out, designers need to be compensated for either a redesign or more RFIs. Your construction manager needs to be compensated if they're extending the schedule, they're on site longer, or they're working at nights. And furniture folks should be compensated if they're either storing furniture or they're actually installing furniture starting at midnight. Just a couple of thoughts. Touching back on supply chain disruptions, it's now more important than ever to pre-order materials. And our ask from the design community is to be a little bit more forgiving with these product selections during these trying times. Now, it's not all bad news. We're currently working on a couple lead projects where we've had limited disruptions due to local sourcing of the materials. And touching on staggering of work, we're limiting the number of workers on site, which impacts production and schedule, as you can imagine. In some cases, we're working with 1 trade per 400 square feet on small projects and 10 trades per 10,000 square feet on larger projects, which helps maintain social distancing on site. Also working with our furniture friends on this call, they've expressed great interest to have our trades fully off-site when delivering and installing furniture. Currently, we have overlap in those schedules. Now, we all recognize there will be a next time, like Susan mentioned, and given that the world is more interconnected than ever before, we as construction managers are planning to build a more resilient supply chain with our trades that can sustain impacts of more frequent disruptions in the future. Next slide, please. Great. Working with tenants and landlords for several weeks now, the broad conversation is what can we implement now? So let's talk about preparing buildings for returns. Building entrances. In these very high-touch areas, we're expecting long lines to get just inside some of these buildings and not just at the elevator to get up to your floor. Adding ADA door operators with hands-free technology are becoming the new norm. No longer will we be looking to push that big square button at the front of the entrance. Where many landlords might have only 1 door operator installed at a building entrance, more door operators are currently being added. Now, if using a revolving door, make sure it's motion activated and not manual. If manual, we've been recommending to lock these as energy savings is not the largest concern at this point in time. Touching on washroom facilities for both landlords and tenants, faucets, soap dispensers, and flush valves should all be touch-free, and these products are readily available to be installed. Door operators like building entrances are being installed on client floors where possible, but the most popular solution at the moment is for installing foot or arm pulls on high-touch doors, kind of like the ones you see in a restaurant kitchen door. Typically, they're under $100 installed. Next slide, please. Okay, this is a huge conversation point. So let's spend a minute on operating HVAC systems during a pandemic. Now, I want to state that I'm not an engineer. However, these are some of our conversations. Stakeholders insist HVAC systems to be reviewed, and we couldn't agree more. I also want to note that there is currently little research on the extent to which COVID is transmitted via HVAC systems. But we agree people want something additional to the previous points we've had in the slide to make them feel safe. Let's spend a moment on some of these now and near strategies to help support some of these initiatives. 1, confirm that your existing system providing fresh air is performing as originally designed. Where possible, upgrade to the MERV 13 air filters for your system. 2, introducing fresh air has the effect of diluting the pathogen load within the air. So if your system has a demand control feature, you could request to disable it to maximize fresh air within the limits of the existing infrastructure. 3, tenants and landlords could extend the HVAC operating hours. The longer the fan runs, the more time the air will pass through the filters, improving the air quality. Typically, we're seeing the system starting 2 hours earlier in the day and extending about 3 hours at the end of the day. Now, I need to stress that HVAC changes in buildings are not easily changed, and HVAC changes will result in increased energy use. I hope the past few points will help you with your planning. Over to you, Lori.
You're muted, Lori.
Thank you. Thanks, Joel. Next up is the Office Source SCI, Ben and Kyle. And they're a single source supplier of furniture and related services. They have a proven track record of over 7 million square feet of furnishing office spaces in the GTA. Office Source and HOK have worked together on Rogers, Questrade, and EY, just to name a few.
Thanks, Lori. So does our furniture still work? Of course it does. Don't think that what you've installed on a recent project is now irrelevant. A proper return to work plan with a staggered approach that supports social distancing will result in minimal physical changes to the space. This is a general comment, of course, and different spaces will need more updates than other. Susan had mentioned that a 6-person meeting room will now max out at 2 users, and that's kind of what we're going to see. You may also want to sit your employees at every other seat to create distance. I know some companies are toying with the idea of 2 to 3 shifts daily. Your furniture, for the most part, will still work. Next slide. Think of your furniture as an investment, and you've made a significant one. So don't tear it down and rebuild at the first glimpse of change. I want everyone to consider the emotional reaction to making the workplace feel safe. I, for one, get a little spooked and anxiety levels rise when I walk into a store that's covered in shields. The Hannibal Lecter effect isn't the best workplace vibe. Plan with flexibility. If you're dividing a space, consider how you can use these products in the future. Remember, those large plexi screens are an additional surface to disinfect. You also do not want to eliminate collab zones altogether. You want to rethink them. Individual breakout enclosures or using a yin-yang type of orientation with modular seating can achieve this. With vast majority of companies looking at a staggered return, social distancing can happen through education, individual responsibility, and a well thought out plan to return to the workplace. We sell furniture. We don't sell change management services, but at this time, we urge everyone to engage their design partners to focus on future planning.
Next slide.
Next.
So while it has been tough over the last few months to be able to draw positives out of what's going on, the one thing that I know we're excited about that is really pushing us all is the way that organizations have adapted quickly to not just video conferencing, but also working from home. So while a lot of companies were already pretty advanced in that area, this is really pushing those that viewed when you're not in the office, you can't be doing the same level of work. And that's really what the title of this slide says it all, that if you have good people that you trust, they'll perform regardless of the environment that they're in. And through this experience, I think we'll all agree that it's made it crystal clear that our number one asset is our own people. So how are we going to support them with this new style of work? We've seen some companies already take immediate action and provide an allowance. So if it's a fixed allowance, the one thing that we are recommending is that you make it an approvable expense, because there has been situations where we've seen a certain amount of cash allotted to each employee, and then they can use it how they please. So then if you run into an issue 6 months, in 6 months with their setup at home, then you won't want to reinvest in it if you're thinking that you already did. So with that, that's all talking about what's going on immediately, but then how would this look in a project scenario? So if there was a project you would have done in 2019 that, let's imagine your organization was taking 20,000 square feet of space. Well, maybe in 2021, that same project, you now have a strong work from home policy in place. Maybe it's only 12,000 square feet. So what we're urging is that you take the savings from that 8,000 square feet and reinvest it back in your people to ensure that they're set up with seamless technology and ergonomic support, whether they're in the office or at home. Next. So Susan touched on some of the material changes that could happen within interior design, and ultimately those same adjustments can be made with the standard furniture that we have today. So it doesn't require a new line of furniture in order to make it safe. We can just apply different materials that are easily cleanable, bleach cleanable, and non-porous materials will already advance us a long way immediately with what we have available. And as far as what we're working on with Technion for what's coming for new product, today's not a big reveal for a new product launch, but there is a lot of the consideration of what you're hearing on the call with antimicrobial finishes. We're even looking at some touchless solutions, but the goal of it is to launch a design that is planned for longevity, because we don't just want a COVID-19 product. We want something that is going to function today, tomorrow, and into the future. Next. Well, traditionally, our relationship in furniture with technology has been primarily to support it. In the last few months, we really identified an opportunity to provide even more value to our clients and ultimately anyone who manages any piece of real estate. So whether it's one small space or a global real estate portfolio, we've actually been working together with DTS on partnering on some workplace technology solutions. And to dig deeper into that, I'm going to pass it back to Lori. Oh, mute.
Last but not least, we have Russell from DTS. They're AV workplace integrator. They help lead organizations respond to today's needs for rapid communication, greater collaboration, and increased productivity through audiovisual technologies. DTS and HOK work together on Stryker, College of Nurses, and Questrade.
Thanks, Lori. I remember in the early days of COVID going to my local grocery store and getting at the door and seeing a sign saying only 50 people allowed at a time. And of course, I had no idea how many people were in the store. And when I finally fumbled my way in there, the signage on the inside was about as good as the one on the outside. And every time I took a turn, oh, there we go. Every time I took a turn, I found myself bumping into somebody, and my stress and anxiety levels started to rise. And it was just fear of the unknown and lack of information. And over time, companies quickly figured out that clarity of information was hugely important. And then they took steps to turn the experience into a more palatable and acceptable one where I didn't feel as stressed out and as unsafe. And it's those feelings of anxiety and stress that we're feeling when we think about returning back to the office. We just don't know. And how many times a day do we hear politicians, when talking about COVID, use the expressions, we just don't know. So I believe we have an obligation, if we can gather information, to share it with the people that matter, and that's our people returning back to work. And that's where technology comes into play. It allows us to collect a tremendous amount of information, distill it down to important nuggets, and more importantly, distribute it to the people that matter. And at DTS, we believe in a holistic approach to this. You can run out and buy parts and pieces on the internet, but we really bridge the gap between people and technology and provide your company with a solution that's dedicated and carved out to solve issues that are pertinent to your people. The first part of that solution is people counting. And the way we do that is through a very sophisticated sensor that mounts over the top of a doorway, means of egress, washroom, and it casts a beam giving us an accurate count on the comings and goings underneath that beam. And what the software is looking at, it's not a camera, it's actually monitoring movement and shapes, so it's respecting employee privacy, but it's counting those people within a 98% accuracy level. We're going to see more digital signage come up throughout the space because we want to share that information with a constant reminder that you are safe within your workspace and that we do care about your safety. An example is mounting this over a washroom door and mounting a small digital sign on the outside. So if you're limiting 3 people to the washroom, you're not wondering if there's 1 or 2 or 4 in there. It's clearly stated And it's also being broadcast to your personal digital device, which is your cell phone or your laptop. And this is just another example of how that digital display can benefit people in the workplace. The second part of the solution is workplace scheduling software. We've all seen the room reservation panels located outside meeting rooms. Sorry about that. And as well as there's now available desk booking panels that sit outside the desk. Now just keep in mind, these augment the software. They're not necessary in order for the software to work. So if your budget doesn't allow for that, you can still move ahead with a solution. It uses a simple scheduling app, which is enable users to find meeting rooms and desks. It automatically checks them in when they're within 100 feet of their office space. It allows us to, as cleaning cost goes up, we can tie our cleaning vendors into the app. So it's more of a usage-based cleaning. And I'll give you an example. Let's say George books a desk Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. Then on Monday night and Tuesday night, the cleaning staff know not to do as deep a clean as they would on Wednesday night for when Sarah's turning up on Thursday. And as that deep clean is done, it sends a notification to Sarah that her desk was deeply sanitized at 11:59 the night before. It allows us to quickly close unsafe areas in the event of something, and then push that notification out to the people that may have booked there to allow them to rebook a desk space. And it provides instant contact tracing. So if Sarah happened to catch COVID, then we have a historical record of anybody that would have been in her work group area, and it automatically pushes that notification out to them that they should take some proper precautions. The third part of the solution is visitor management. We've all seen the iPads outside the door or reception area. Now they've been augmented to allow you to control these through your cell phone. So you're not touching a shared device anymore. And if you wish, you can add the feature of temperature check. So if you're within 3 feet of the device, it'll let you know if you're running hot or not. It's really just a first alert, and it doesn't apply to every company. So it's just something to think about. And then finally, the long-term benefits are utilization and occupancy data, space planning, as well as accurate data on room use. So for example, if you take a look at the end of the year and 50% of your rooms are heavily used, it'll allow you to ask the question, is it based on technology, size, and should we be planning a different use of space the next time we plan these meeting rooms? And then lastly, it quantifies the cost of the underutilized space in planning for the future. And at DTS, we truly believe in that holistic approach to solving the workplace technology. And under that, we capture the meeting rooms, people counting, digital signage, desk booking, visitor management, and provide that to you as a one dashboard solution. So thank you, and I'll pass it back to Lori.
Thanks, Russell. Okay, now the fun begins. We are going to have a Q&A. So we've received some questions from the participants. One of the first ones was, I've heard that an average of 20 to 30%, depending on space, this would be for Susan, reduction in headcount can accommodate social distancing space. What have you found as the rule of thumb average?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And this goes back to what I was talking about with respect to supply and demand modeling. So on a basis of having worked with many clients across North America, in our analyses of their layouts, we have developed as a rule of thumb 250 square feet per person in order to determine that maximum occupancy. And it typically works out to about somewhere between 45% and 50% at the max in terms of that maximum occupancy. So that would enable about half of your workforce to come back.
Great, thanks, Susan. I have a question for Joel. What are the measures being used to check in trades to job sites? How has this impacted the work to keep everyone safe on site?
Oh, great. Okay, great question. Well, I guess getting to an M-Form site, not only for our trades, for our consultants, our PMs, our designers, and our clients, we have a pretty smart process. So you get to site, there'll be our COVID postings on the doors. And there's an M-Form QR code. What you'll do is take your smartphone, hold it up to the QR code. It will automatically push out a digital form that you read and you sign. It's checking off that you haven't been overseas, etc. Once you've signed that, we get a ding that someone's has been authorized to enter the site. You'll meet with one of our site coordinators who'll then take a temperature and then actually give you a wristband to enter the site. And what's important about the wristband is we want everyone to feel safe that everyone has been checked. And if you see somebody without a wristband, you say something.
Great. I'm going to throw out some other random questions to the whole team. I'd like to go through each one of you. If you had limited amount of funds on what would you do? What would you do? And we'll start with Susan first.
Another great question. This is a fantastic group. So, you know, as I'd mentioned before, this is not unusual that what we're seeing right now. People are still in triage mode with respect to, you know, holding on to their funds. So at the very least, it's really considering what kind of capacity is needed with the existing layouts that you do have, and really thinking about your operational changes and ensuring that change management practices are put in place from the onset.
Thanks. Joel, you're next.
Going back to part of my presentation, so I think looking at high touch areas such as doors to other washrooms or client cafes, we've been installing foot or arm poles on these doors so you don't actually have to touch it with your hands each and every time. And they're typically, like I said before, $100 each installed.
Much cheaper than the Wave, which is much more expensive. Next up, Kyle.
Thanks, Lori. Yeah, we for an inexpensive sort of option, we would think to really focus and rethink the space. You can either engage your design partners to do this, and that would be through orientation of existing furniture and kind of playing with the floor plan without adding anything new.
Cool. Ben?
Yeah, I would say that, kind of echoing what some other people said, but that it's not a rush to go buy things to fix this, but that investing in the plan is ultimately going to bring you the most success. And to me, I think if you do have the possibility of investing more than just in the planning and the change management, I think the tools that Russell's talking about with being able to monitor how the space is interacting with the people, and then to have that on every single phone that I can be at home at 10 a.m. and check how many people are in the office if I want to go in today. And let's say it's only 4 people from capacity, maybe I won't go today, instead of someone having to manually send an email saying, here's who can go where. So I think those are a couple points for me.
Awesome. Russell?
Thanks, Ben, for taking my plug.
Stole your thunder.
That's it.
You all warmed up.
I'll just thanks for warming me up. All of what I spoke about, save for the actual hardware of the sensors themselves, is software as a subscription. So it's an easy entry into that on a monthly cost rather than investing huge upfront capital costs.
Cool. Got everybody. Next question to HOK. We've lately seen several large organizations, primarily in the tech sector, claim that work from home will be the new norm, and the office, going to the office is out. Are you finding feedback like this from your clients?
Well, that's very interesting. So I, of course, have been aware of the news as well as everyone else, and that there have been several large, organizations saying that. I think that it's an ever-evolving situation. It remains fluid. I think that, as I mentioned, people are not rushing back, and they're really starting to shift to strategy right now. That's what we're seeing. Companies are analyzing and strategizing before they make those huge wholesale changes. Will that happen? Will the office be gone entirely? To be honest, nobody really knows. But I can't imagine that it would just go away entirely. There just may be different reasons to come into the office. And as I've been saying all the way along, it's the resilient workplace that is important, because if there is a vaccine found, I think that as humans, we will very, very quickly go back to previous behavior. So I think it remains to be seen. It's a fascinating time.
Exactly. Okay, so another question. What are the top questions your clients are asking, or where do you find that they are most concerned, and how are the dollars being spent with respect to the pandemic response of their spaces? So who do we want to start with on that one?
I can start just as a very quick response before handing it off to another member here. As I'd mentioned earlier, PPE is a huge thing. People are really concerned about that and talking about that. How do we use an employee face masks? What's going on with that? People are really sitting back and looking at what their neighbors are doing. They are asking the same questions that you're asking. What is everyone else doing? So at this time, it's hard to say exactly where that money is being spent, because we're all in the same boat and all our clients are in the same boat, and we're still strategizing with them.
Joel, you want to take it?
Well, I think what we're seeing right now is a lot of clients are either halting projects that are occupied space renovations. So typically what they're trying to avoid is having construction workers in a similar space to their workers when they get back. So right now, occupied space renovations have been kind of put on hold, and you know, moving forward, you know, they're looking at doing full renovations on the floor plate.
Great. Ben, you want to take the next one? What are the top questions your clients are asking?
Yeah, so I think right now it's a lot of people are taking their time with it, as we've been advising. So because you have to be wary of the amount of information out there right now, because you could find almost an article that supports anything, whether it's that, oh, you should take more space and everyone's going to have a large cubicle, or you should take no office space, or you should cover everything in shields. So we're trying to balance all of those areas and really just make sure that whatever is being invested in is not only a use for COVID-19, because pretty much everything that we're looking at has multiple uses and can last. Great.
And Kyle, what are you seeing your clients asking you for? What kind of questions are they asking?
Yeah, just to echo Ben, there's such an information overload, but we're seeing questions coming from all over, highlighting different issues. A lot of shield questions, a lot of signage questions, and yeah, there's a careful spend around everything. We're not seeing a lot of clients that want to spend a lot of cash right now, obviously. But we're just trying to guide them. Some people will add all of those retrofittable shields to the workstations. Sometimes we'll suggest maybe buying a mobile shield so you can reuse that in another way in the future. But yeah, we're getting questions from all over. It's pretty interesting.
Cool. And Russell?
I think the main question we get asked is a hybrid of working from home and the technology to support that. And when coming back to the office, even jobs we're currently under construction right now, they're rethinking, do they have enough video cameras in the meeting rooms? Because prior to COVID, I was usually the only person online have my video on. And literally overnight, after beating my head against the wall for 20 years, everybody's doing video. So I would say that's the number one thing we're getting asked.
Great, awesome. We have 1 more minute left. What question do I want to ask? Joel, can you estimate how much time is added for construction during COVID?
Well, the simple statement is 10 to 40%, but what I would recommend is engaging your construction manager. Every project is different, every building's different, every spec is different. Like I mentioned, lead projects we've been working with have been a lot easier to get supplies for. So reach out, and every project is different.
Awesome. Good. Well, we wanted to say from the group, thank you very much. Be safe and be well.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
See you, everybody.
Thanks all.